There's a specific kind of quiet you only get in Florida apartment hallways after midnight. Not silence exactly, more like the AC and the fluorescents settling into their own conversation, while everyone else in the building has given up on the day. I was standing in that quiet on a Tuesday night in March 2022, in a stairwell off Scherer Road in Tallahassee, elbow deep in a splitter panel that hadn't been touched since maybe 2015. I'd been with the company almost 4 years by then, night maintenance mostly. Small residential clusters, the kind of 2-story stucco buildings you see everywhere north of the interstate. The work was easy. Reset the amp, swap out a bad splitter, log the readings, drive to the next address. On a good night, I hit 6 or 7 jobs and was home by 5. That building was the last one on my list. 12 units, 2 floors, 1 shared utility closet under the stairs on the ground floor. The closet was maybe 4 feet deep. You had to crouch to see the top of the rack. I remember it was warm for March, but the hallway was cold. They had the central AC cranked because someone on the second floor had complained about the humidity. I could hear it hissing through the vents. There was also a light bulb in the corridor doing that slow buzz they do right before they die, the one that makes you check over your shoulder even when you know it's just electricity. I got there around 2:40, signed in with dispatch, propped the closet door open with my tool bag, and started pulling readings. Nothing weird. Old coax, some corroded connectors. A mouse had chewed the sheathing on one line, but nothing live. Routine. The door to Unit 1B was maybe 8 feet from where I was working. I heard the deadbolt turn. I didn't look right away. People come and go from these buildings at all hours. Night shift nurses, third shift Amazon warehouse guys, whatever. I kept my hands on the panel, but nobody walked past. The door opened, then it closed softly, and then there was just a person standing in the hallway behind me. I turned my head. He was old, late 70s, maybe 80, thin, wearing a plaid pajama shirt tucked into gray sweatpants, no shoes, white socks pulled halfway up his calves. His hair was combed. That's the part I remember clearly. It was 3 in the morning, and his hair was combed like he'd been sitting in his kitchen for a while, ready. I gave him the standard line. "Evening, sir. Sorry about the noise, just doing some scheduled maintenance on the line. Shouldn't be more than 20 minutes. He didn't say anything. He didn't nod, didn't wave me off, didn't do the little half smile people do when they're annoyed but don't want to be rude. He just stood there, about 6 feet from me, and looked down at my hands. Not my face, my hands. I turned back to the panel, told myself he was probably half asleep, wandered out because he heard voices in the hall and forgot why. My grandfather used to do that toward the end. You'd find him in the kitchen at 4 in the morning holding a spoon and looking confused about the concept of spoons. So I let it go and kept working. Except he didn't leave. I could see him in my peripheral vision, not moving, not shifting his weight. Old people usually do that thing where they lean on the wall or the door frame because standing hurts. He wasn't doing any of that. He was just planted there in his socks on the tile, watching my hands work. I tried again. "You need something?" "Everything all right with your service in 1B?" Nothing. The AC clicked off. That's when I really felt how quiet it was. You could hear the compressor unwinding somewhere in the ceiling, and my own breathing, and the little metal ticks of the splitter connectors when I turned them. Nothing from him. Not even the sound of him swallowing. I sped up. I'm going to be honest about that. I stopped double-checking readings and started just closing things out. Logged the panel as serviced, snapped photos for the ticket, zip-tied the loose runs. All the stuff I could do without turning around. He stayed where he was the whole time. 10, maybe 12 minutes. I know because I checked the timestamp on the photos later. When I was done, I straightened up, slower than I wanted to, and reached down for my tool bag. My back was to him for maybe 2 seconds. When I turned around, he was closer. Not right on top of me, but closer than he'd been. 4 feet, call it. Close enough that I could see he had a small scab on his lower lip, and his eyes were watery the way old men's eyes get. I said, "All right, I'm all done here. You have a good night." He looked up from my hands to my face for the first time. And he said, very quiet, almost polite, "You're the 5th one who's come here." The other 4 didn't come back. That's it. That's what he said. Word for word. I've thought about it enough times that I know I've got the phrasing right. Then he turned around, walked back to 1B, and closed the door behind him. I heard the deadbolt slide. I stood in that hallway for probably 30 seconds without moving. My tool bag was in my hand. The dying bulb was still buzzing. I remember thinking, very stupidly, that I should knock on his door and ask him what he meant, because that's what a normal adult would do. And then thinking, no, absolutely not. Get in the van. I got in the van. I drove to the office instead of going home. It's a 30-minute drive down to the yard on Capitol Circle, and I did it doing 35 in a 45 zone with the radio off. I couldn't tell you what I was thinking about exactly. Something like a low, static feeling behind my eyes. Like something had been said out loud that I couldn't put back. At the office, I logged into the internal maintenance system. We have a database that shows every service ticket for every address, going back to when the company digitized their records around 2008. I pulled up the building, 12 units, the utility closet under the stairs. I searched by that specific closet's asset tag. 5 entries came up before mine, 4 techs. The first one was from 2011, a guy I didn't recognize, initials only in the older records. His ticket closed out clean. His employment record showed he resigned the following day. No reason logged, no exit interview, just a resignation letter I couldn't open because the file had been archived. The second one was 2015. I actually knew him a little. He'd been at a company barbecue once. He transferred to the Panama City office 2 weeks after that service call. I remembered somebody joking about it at the time, because Panama City is a demotion route, longer drives for the same pay, and nobody transfers there voluntarily. The third one was 2018, another transfer. This one went all the way to Ocala. I didn't know him. The fourth was March 2020. His status was listed as terminated, attendance. I asked around later. 2 of the older guys remembered him. They said he'd been reliable for years. Then, 1 week, he just stopped answering his phone. Didn't quit, didn't call in, didn't pick up when dispatch tried him. His truck was found in his own driveway. His apartment was fine. Nothing missing, no note. His family never got a straight answer. Company waited the required number of no-shows and closed his file. I sat at my desk with the 4 tickets pulled up in separate tabs, and my own ticket, unsubmitted, in the 5th. It was almost 6 in the morning by then. The sun was coming up over the parking lot, and the guys on the day shift were pulling in. I wrote a report, not a ticket, an actual internal incident report, which is a form you're supposed to use for things like being threatened by a customer or witnessing a crime on a job site. I described what happened, exactly what he said, and I linked all 4 prior tickets in the notes. I flagged the address. I sent it up the chain. 2 days later, my supervisor called me into his office. He's a decent guy, been with the company since it was still called something else. He said, "Hey, got your report. Appreciate you writing it up." I asked him what they were going to do about it. He didn't quite look at me. He said, "Thanks, we'll take it under advisement." Then he asked me about a totally different job on a totally different street. The address came off my route the following week. Nobody told me it was coming off. I just noticed one day that the building wasn't on my list anymore, and when I searched for it in the system, the closet's asset tag came back with a different tech's name on the standing assignment. Somebody based out of a different yard, in a different rotation. I don't know that guy. I've never met him. I've thought about looking him up more than once, just to see if he's still working there. I haven't done it. I still drive past that building sometimes when I'm cutting through that part of town. The light in the hallway is always on. I don't know if Unit 1B is still his. I've never seen anyone go in or out of it. My work takes me all over Tallahassee, and I've had plenty of chances to knock on that door, ask him what he meant, get an actual answer. I don't want an actual answer. That's the honest truth. Whatever he was telling me that night, I don't think he was warning me. I think he was counting. The manuscript came to me in November 2019 through a broker I'd worked with maybe 4 times before. He handled estate sales for old families in Belgium and the north of Germany, the kind of clients who don't like their names in databases. His email said the item was in poor condition but readable, 15th century, probably Middle Dutch or a related dialect, and the buyer wanted a full transcription and a working translation into English before the end of January. I lived on the top floor of a narrow house on Bloemgracht back then, 3 floors up a staircase so steep you had to lean forward to climb it. The apartment was one long room with the kitchen at the back and my desk at the front, under the window that looked out over the canal. In winter, that window leaked cold, and the radiator under it made a ticking sound every few minutes, like a clock that couldn't decide on the time. The courier brought it on a Monday. It came in an aluminum case lined with foam, and inside the foam was a smaller box, and inside that was the book, wrapped in acid-free tissue. 94 folios. The cover was gone. The first page had a date at the top, written in a hand that was small and very steady. Anno Domini 1476. Below the date, the text began, and that was where the problem started. It wasn't Middle Dutch. It wasn't Latin either, though there were Latin fragments scattered through it. Most of it was in a substitution cipher, but a strange one, because the substitutions shifted every few paragraphs, according to a pattern I couldn't identify right away. On the third day, I found the key, hidden in the margins of folio 7, a little diagram of a wheel with letters around the rim, and after that, things moved faster. By the end of the first week, I had maybe 12 pages roughed out. The content was odd. It read like a list of events, each one dated, each one described in the same flat voice. A sickness beginning in the east, a great stilling of the roads, markets closed by the hand of no king. I assumed at first it was a work of prophecy in the medieval sense, some monk or hermit imitating the Book of Revelation, and I made a note to check it against the usual apocalyptic texts of the period. I didn't check. I got busy with the cipher and kept translating. The client, through the broker, sent his first email around the 15th of December. He introduced himself only as Willem. He asked how the work was going and whether I had reached folio 30. I hadn't. I was on 22. He wrote back within an hour and said, "Please continue, and please send him a copy of every 10 folios as I completed them, in plain text, no formatting." I said that wasn't how I usually worked. He offered to double the fee. I agreed. The apartment in December smelled like wet wool and the burnt sugar of the Stroopwafel bakery 2 doors down. I stood at the window one afternoon watching a barge unload Christmas trees onto the quay, and I realized I hadn't left the building in 4 days. That was the first time I noticed how much time the manuscript was eating. The second thing I noticed was harder to place. I would read a passage in the morning, and it would seem like nothing, a vague piece of doom-mongering about crowded cities. And then in the evening, I'd hear something on the radio, and the wording would come back to me. Not exactly. Just close enough that I'd go back to my notes and reread the line, and put it down and pour myself a drink, instead of thinking about it. By early January, I had 80 folios done. I stopped sleeping properly. I would work until 3 or 4, wake at 9, drink coffee at the desk, and start again. I sent Willem the pages in batches of 10, as promised. He never commented on the content. He only ever wrote, "Received, thank you, please continue." The folio that broke me was number 83. It described a city in the north of Italy where the sick were being carried out of their homes by men in white cloth, and where the churches were kept closed, and where the bells were rung at a fixed hour each evening for the dead. The passage named the month, 3rd month of the year. It said the count would rise so fast the living could not bury the dead in the usual way. I put the pages down and stood in the kitchen for a long time. It was the 2nd week of January, 2020. I had a calendar on the fridge, one of those free ones the Turkish grocer gives out, and I remember looking at the little grid of squares and trying to work out what date it actually was. I told myself the passage was generic. Plague literature from the 15th century isn't rare. Men in cloth carrying the dead, silent bells, mass graves, all of that shows up in accounts of the Black Death, and in every imitator for 200 years after. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't. I finished the translation on the 29th of January. I didn't send it. I told Willem I needed another week for review. He said fine. He was patient about it in a way that felt off, like a man who already knew the answer, waiting for a child to work through a sum. In February, the news out of Wuhan got worse. In March, northern Italy went into lockdown. On the evening of the 11th, I sat at my desk with the translation open on my laptop and Folio 83 under my hand, and I read the passage again. And then I closed the laptop and drank most of a bottle of wine and slept on the floor by the radiator. I never sent the file. I stopped answering Willem's emails. He sent 3, then 2 more, then nothing. The broker called once in April, and I told him I'd had a family emergency and would refund the advance. He was quiet for a moment on the line and then said, "No, keep it. And please don't contact him again." I didn't. The manuscript stayed in the aluminum case in the bottom of my wardrobe from April through most of the summer. I didn't open it. I didn't reread the translation. I moved my desk away from the window because the light on it reminded me of the mornings when I'd been working on the last folios. The call came at the end of July, on a Tuesday, a little after 10 in the evening. It was a Dutch mobile number I didn't recognize. I picked up because I was expecting a delivery. "Have you read it yet?" A man's voice. No greeting. Not a question the way he said it, more like a check-in. I asked who was calling. He said Willem, of course. He asked again, softer this time, whether I'd read what it said about the following year, about 2021. I told him I'd stopped working on it in January. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "You finished on the 29th. I hadn't told him that. I'd told him I needed extra review time. The date was in my private notes and in the file properties on my laptop, nowhere else. I said I had to go. He said, "Read Folio 90 and Folio 92. Then you can burn it if you like. It won't matter." He hung up. I sat on the floor of the bedroom with the phone in my hand for maybe 20 minutes. Then I got up and dragged the aluminum case out from under the winter coats. Folio 90 was 3 paragraphs. It named a country in the East where a substance would be given to the people, and how in some places they would take it gladly, and in others they would refuse, and how the argument over it would sit inside families like a stone. It gave a month. It said the argument would still be going in the winter. Folio 92 described the collapse of a large structure by water and the number of the dead, and a fire that would burn for many days at a place of storage. I remember the phrase used for the fire, something about a mouth of smoke that would not close. I remember the number. I put the pages back in the case. I carried it down 3 flights of stairs and out into the courtyard behind the building, where the bins were, and where an old iron brazier sat that the landlord used to burn garden waste in autumn. I put the folios into the brazier one by one and lit them with a kitchen match. Vellum doesn't burn the way paper does. It curls first, and it smells like scorched hair, and then it goes brittle and black around the edges before the flame catches the middle. It took me nearly an hour. The last folio I held in my hand for a long time before I let it go. It was blank. I threw the case in the canal on my way back upstairs. I don't know why. It felt correct at the time. I woke up the next morning and I already regretted it. I had the translation file, of course. I still have it. But the original was what mattered. The substitutions, the hand, the marginalia, the way the ink sat different on some folios than on others. A translation is an opinion. The original was the thing. I started looking that same week. I contacted every dealer I'd ever bought from. I paid for database access at 3 research libraries. I wrote to 2 paleographers at Leiden. I sent polite, carefully worded inquiries about a 15th century Netherlandish manuscript in a mixed cipher, roughly 94 folios, no cover, dated 1476. I described the wheel diagram on folio 7. I described the hand. Nothing. Not a partial match. Not a catalog entry. A woman at the KB in The Hague wrote back and said, kindly, that the description sounded almost invented, that no known workshop in the Low Countries in that period had produced anything like it, that perhaps I was thinking of a later imitation. I still check, once a month, sometimes more. I run the search terms. I look at auction listings. I read the acquisition reports from the university collections. There is no other copy. There was never any other copy. The only person who ever knew what was written on folio 94 was Willem, and Willem hasn't called again. The firm hired me in early March, and by the second week, I already knew something was wrong with the paper. Not the paper itself. The paper was fine. Cardboard boxes, standard letter size, banker's boxes with the little cutout handles, stacked 6 high in a leased office on the 16th floor of a building on Louisiana Street in downtown Houston. That part was normal. Every liquidation looks the same from the outside. Boxes, coffee cups, a laptop, a checklist. I do this for a living. When a company decides to wind itself down, or a court decides for it, someone has to actually do the work. Sort the files, notify the vendors, cancel the leases, destroy what has to be destroyed, and archive what has to be archived. I'm the guy who sits in the empty office for 6 or 8 weeks and turns a business into a set of PDFs and a shredding certificate. The client this time was a small outfit. I'll call them by the name on the door, which was something generic with strategy in it. Management consulting, 6 employees, 7 years old, dissolving voluntarily. Clean books, no litigation, no unpaid tax. The kind of job you take because it pays and because you'll be done by Easter. The lease ran through April. 16th floor, corner suite, view of the tollway. Someone had left the blinds half up, and the March sun came in yellow across the carpet every afternoon around 3. That's the thing I remember first, the color of the carpet at 3 in the afternoon. I started with vendors, utilities, the copier lease, the coffee service, the plant service, the shredding company, all paid up, all contracts terminated cleanly, 30 days notice, signed by a partner whose signature I recognized from the incorporation papers. Fine, moved to payroll. 6 W-2s, all filed. Final checks cut in mid-February. Fine. Then the client files. They kept them the old way, in physical folders, in a locked room in the back. That surprised me a little in 2022, but consulting firms have their reasons. Confidentiality clauses, non-disclosures, clients who prefer nothing on a server. I've seen worse. The folders were arranged by year, 7 drawers, 1 per year of the firm's life. I opened 2015 first because that was the oldest, and I like to work forward. The first client in 2015 was a name I recognized, not because I knew him, but because everyone with a TV knew him in 2016. He ran a mid-cap energy company out of the Woodlands and got walked out of his own boardroom the following spring after an accounting mess. I remembered the picture. Cardboard box, tie loose, the elevator doors closing on him. I noted it and moved on. Coincidence. Consultants work with executives. Executives get fired. That's the whole industry. The second client, same year, was a woman who ran a hospital system down in the valley. I didn't remember her, but I Googled her because I had the laptop open. She'd resigned in 2017 during an investigation into billing. Never charged, just gone. Third client, 2015. A guy who owned a chain of car dealerships. Indicted, 2018. Wire fraud. Pled out. I stopped Googling and just started reading. There were 9 clients in 2015. All 9. Every single one of them. Not all criminal. Some just fell. A city councilman who lost a runoff after a photo went around. A tech founder whose board pushed him out over an HR complaint. A church guy who had a foundation and lost the foundation. Different flavors, different scales, but the same shape. Client comes in, works with the firm for a few months to a year, Everything looks fine, and then 18 months to 3 years later, the client's career is on fire. I sat in that room for a long time. The fluorescent light above the file cabinets had a bad ballast and clicked every few minutes. I remember counting the clicks while I tried to think. I told myself it was selection bias. High-profile people take risks. Consultants get hired when things are already shaky. Of course, some of them fall. I moved to 2016. 11 clients in 2016. Same pattern. Every one. 2017. 13 clients. Same. The odds get silly fast. If you assume, generously, that maybe 1 in 5 executives at that level ends up in a public mess within 3 years, the chance of 13 in a row is 1 in a billion or so. I did the math on a legal pad because I wanted to see it in ink. I still have the legal pad. It's in the same box as the folder. I want to be clear about what the files actually contained. This is the part that stayed with me. Nothing. I mean, not literally nothing. There were engagement letters, invoices, meeting agendas, decks. All formatted correctly, all in the right fonts, all signed on the right lines. The invoices were reasonable, $20,000, $30,000 a month for a mid-size retainer. The decks talked about growth strategy, org design, market positioning, standard consulting boilerplate. If you pulled any one folder off the shelf and read it, you would say, this is a firm doing management consulting for a client. But there was no work product, no models, no data rooms, no follow-up. Every folder ended the same way, with a short one-page memo signed by one of the partners, dated the last day of the engagement, that said some version of advisory relationship concluded per client request, all obligations discharged. That was it. No summary of outcomes, no recommendations delivered. I called the firm's outside counsel, who was the person who'd hired me. Older guy, based in Dallas, semi-retired, doing this as a favor to someone. I asked him whether he'd ever met any of the partners in person. He said no. Everything had been by email and one phone call. He'd been engaged in January to handle the wind down. The partners' instructions had been in a signed letter with a notary stamp out of Delaware. I asked him where the partners were now. He said he didn't know. He'd sent the final paperwork to a P.O. box in Sugarland, and it had been signed for and returned. He had a phone number that went to voicemail and an email that bounced after the second week of February. I hung up and went back to the files. The last client on the last shelf was dated November 2021. A woman who ran a logistics company on the ship channel. I did not Google her. I did not want to know yet. Instead, I pulled the personnel files for the 6 employees. 2 partners, 3 associates, an office manager. All Texas driver's licenses on file, all Houston addresses. I ran the addresses through the county appraisal district because I have access for work. Every single one of them had sold their house between January 15th and February 8th. Cash sales, mostly, or fast closings. No forwarding addresses on the change of address forms with USPS. I know because I checked those too. 6 people, same city, 6 weeks. All out. I want to say I did something. I want to say I called someone. I did not. Nothing in the file was illegal. Nothing in the file was even unusual, taken piece by piece. A consulting firm dissolved, and its people moved. Their clients had bad luck. That was the story you could tell yourself, if you wanted to. I finished the liquidation on schedule, 22 business days. I terminated the lease, shipped the office furniture to auction, filed the final franchise tax report with the state, and hired the same shredding company the firm had used for years to come pick up the client files. I watched them wheel the bins onto the truck. I stood in the loading bay off Rusk Street and watched the driver close the door. I have the certificate of destruction. It's in my records. Except I kept one folder, a copy. I ran it through the Xerox in the corner myself, page by page, the afternoon before the shred pickup. It's the client list, just the master index, names, dates of engagement, dates of conclusion, a column at the end that the firm labeled status and left blank on every row. I filled in that column myself, one evening in April, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop. 68 names. Every one of them has something. A resignation, a lawsuit, a grand jury, a scandal, a headline, a career that stops in the middle of a sentence. I do not know what the firm actually did for these people. That's what I keep coming back to. There was no work product. There were only bills and signatures. And every client, after paying the bills and signing the papers, walked out of the room and eventually walked into a fire. The last client's fire hasn't happened yet. I check on her every few months. She still runs her company. Her LinkedIn is normal. She posted a photo from a conference in Galveston in September, and she looked fine. The folder is on the shelf above my desk in a plain accordion file. I have not shown it to anyone. I keep thinking I should mail it somewhere, to a reporter or to the FBI's Houston field office on Justice Park Drive. And every time I sit down to write the cover letter, I stop. I don't know what I'd say. I don't know what I'd be reporting. The firm dissolved cleanly. The people are gone. The clients are, mostly, already ruined. The paperwork is ash. What I have is a list of names and a hunch. And hunches are not something you send to the FBI in a manila envelope. So it sits on the shelf. I look at it sometimes when I'm working late. 68 names, 67 fires, and one woman in Galveston who took a photo at a conference and posted it with a caption about supply chain resilience. I hope she stays fine. I hope, honestly, that I threw out the wrong copy.